Hi, and welcome to our Social Blueprint series on Everybody Has a Story to Tell. And today I have the privilege of being joined by Keren Ludski, who is CEO of Red Nose Australia. But in order to understand where she is now, we need to get an idea of where her journey has brought her from and a bit about that journey. So thank you for joining me today.
My pleasure.
I'm going to start way back when and take you back to your 18-year-old self. So year is 1985.
Yep.
And you're a graduate of Mount Scopus. What was your 18-year-old self thinking at that point that the future had in store for you?
My 18-year-old self only wanted to do medicine. She wanted to be a doctor. And she didn't get the marks to get into medicine, and I guess was challenged to work out, well, where to from here. So decided that I would focus on psychology, and maybe then I could focus on child psychology, because I think 18-year-old me thought she was going to be a pediatrician. So I thought that psychology was a different way of working with children, and that was really the next steps for me.
Okay, so you then went on to study. You're studying at Monash Uni. Okay. And you studied, when you finished your course, were you still thinking psychology?
I finished the course and I was thinking, I don't know what I want to be. I just knew I didn't want to study anymore. I did a graduate program at Maya, thinking that I'd get into personnel, or what's now HR, and did a year out at High Point, which was a bit of a shock to the system for the Scopus girl, but realised after I finished that I still had no idea what I wanted to do. And was working almost like part-time in retail, trying to work out what are the next steps for me.
Okay, so at that point, you've taken a digression away from psychology, certainly. You're more in the retail space. Was psychology, or the pediatric side of psychology, no longer part of the thought process?
I think if I'm really honest with myself, I think at that point, so I was now probably almost 21, and I just wanted to get married and have kids.
Okay. So soon after you did do that?
Yep.
You were married, what?
89.
Okay. So for 4 years out of school. And you're now married. Are you still at Maya at that point?
I was at Maya still when we got married,
yep.
And then moved into this just working in retail, trying to work out really what I wanted to do. But I think the focus was, how soon can I get pregnant and have a family?
Okay, so we'll get to the getting pregnant and having a family in a minute. But at this point, Kerens Kitchen, which you may know as now a very well-known biscuit company, Kerens Kitchen is born. And for those who don't know, Kerens Kitchen is named after Keren, or nicknamed Kez. So tell us how that came about.
So working retail, was making some very good choc chip cookies, and people were saying to me, why don't you sell them? And
so just as a side hustle?
Just as a side hustle. Yep. And I was just making them for family, friends, etc. And I think I started making them, and Mum started taking them for dinner gifts, etc. when she was going out for dinner. And then I think I thought this could be something fun to do part-time when I had kids, never expecting it to be the business that it is today. And I remember Mum going into a little coffee shop in Glenferrie Road and saying, where do you get your bags from? My daughter's making some biscuits. And he said, if she can make my almond bread and Florentines, she can have my business. So Mum came home, she told me that. I said, that's fantastic. How do I make those? And that was the beginning of Mum and I working together.
Which is pretty innovative, given that, in today's day and age, pretty much during COVID, lady startups, are a dime a dozen in a sense. But, we're going back to late 80s, early 90s. That's a pretty brave and bold move to say, okay, I'm now taking on the world and making a business out of making choc chip cookies.
I don't think we ever thought about taking on the world. I genuinely, when people ask me today, talk me through your business plan, talk me through, what was the sales pitch, where was the niche, what were you trying to achieve? I have a quiet chuckle because there was no business plan. We knew there was a niche in good quality handmade biscuits. We had no idea what they cost to make. We just knew we had to be cheaper than our competitors. And, I do remember vividly saying to Mum, I can't take the risk of not working. What if we don't make any money? And she said, I think we'll be okay. And, I think at the time we were talking very small money. There was no big plan or, an end goal. It was just, we made it up as we went along.
So, okay, so you start this business, you're working from her kitchen
Well, we actually started in my kitchen, which was a 1-door oven, and then moved to her kitchen being a 2-door oven. We'd been doing it for maybe 3 or 4 months. Mum would be up at the crack of dawn doing the baking. I would get out in the morning selling, just walking into any deli, independent, anyone that we could think to sell to. And that was kind of the rhythm. I'd come back in the afternoon to help with the baking and the packing. And after about 3 or 4 months, I very sheepishly walked into Mum and Dad's one day and said, Mum, I've got some news for you. And she said, what? I said, I'm pregnant. So we have at this stage a very, very new business and a very pregnant me.
Okay, so you've walked in, you've just started up this business, you've roped your mum into it, and grand plans, and suddenly you're pregnant. What was the feeling at that point? What were you thinking in terms of where it was going to go from there, and what was her response?
Well, I think I genuinely, and this was probably a theme, probably for the first 10 years of Kez's, was that I could do it all, that nothing would have to change. I would have this baby would come to work with me, this baby would be the perfect baby. And he actually was. So, in the very early days, he did just come to work with me. I had the best leg muscles because I fed him and then I put him in the pram and then I rocked the pram as I continued to make the biscuits. And I don't think a huge amount actually changed probably until I had my second child.
Presumably she took on more responsibility though at that point in time as you're getting very pregnant?
Not that I remember.
Okay.
She may say, yes, I did.
Yeah. So at this point you've outgrown the home kitchen.
Yes.
And you've moved to Malvern, to a shop front in Malvern. How did that work with a baby?
Well, as I said, he was an incredible baby and he just came with me. So we had a little cubby, almost a little cubby hole, around the back where I could take him and feed. And then I'd put him back in the pram and I'd rock him till he went back to sleep. And, as he got a little bit older, we'd lay out the bunny rug on the floor and he would play on the floor while we kept going. And I don't think I knew any different, but it was just one day became the next.
So fast forward circa 2 years and there's another little toddler, another newborn, I should say.
So 19 months later, the number 2 came along. I think it was at that point that everyone was saying, I can't believe this incredible business that you've built. You must be so proud. How did you do it? This is remarkable. And I would smile really politely. And, what most people didn't know is that every night I would get into bed crying, saying, I'm not doing anything properly. I'm not holding up my end from Kez's. I'm not being the best mother that I want to be. I'm not being the best wife that I wanted to be. And it was probably the first time I realized that I couldn't do it all. And that's a bit of a shock to the system.
It sounds like it would have brought up a lot of guilt. In terms of, from a business perspective, and as you said, a mothering perspective, how were you on a day-to-day basis balancing this? So clearly, emotionally, it was taking its toll. But how were you doing it?
I'm not sure. I think by that stage we probably had. I think I had help at home, so I didn't need to have both boys with me, at the bakery. But I was also, when we started the interview, I was telling you all I wanted to be was a mother.
Mm-hmm.
So not being able to do all of the things that I wanted to do because I felt guilty that Mum was working more hours than me, and I'd conned her into this business and didn't want to leave her responsible, and juggling a million balls at any one time became difficult. And I think that at that point I kind of went, I think I need to step back a little bit. I think at that point I probably went to 3 days instead of working in it every day.
So I mean, at this point in time, we're not talking about a business that's just you, the two of you working in a bakery together. You're now employing staff, you have shifts happening, you've got customers. This is a very real business.
Yeah.
And so did that mean that she took up more of the slack as you stood back?
I would say so, yes.
Yep. So in terms of your plan at that point, if you can remember it all, what was the plan moving forward? If you couldn't give it all to the business and you wanted to spend more time with the boys, what was the plan moving forward?
So it really was about, now I need to work out how do I juggle. And it was about that same time that our brother Michael joined the business. And so he was happy to step in and do, the overseeing, the strategic development, I guess, of the business. So I was able to step back a bit and work out what roles I could do on a part-time basis without feeling I was letting anyone down.
Fair enough. Okay. So if we fast forward again a few years, you're the mother to 2 toddlers and you've got a newborn baby, Ben. So describe for me life at that point. You've got 3 little boys.
If I say I don't remember that time overly well, because it was a juggle, but it was an easier juggle in some ways because I had taken the step back.
Yep.
I acknowledged that I couldn't possibly know and be on top of every decision being made at Kes's. What are the things that I'm going to do in the business that I know that I can take responsibility for, so no one else needs to worry, and feel like I'm contributing as well. And I guess also for me, as much as I said all I wanted to be was a mother, I realized very quickly that staying home wasn't for me. I needed the balance of both. So being able to work 3 days and then be, completely, in mother role, the other 4 worked. But it's also tough. Kes's was my baby as well. So you're kind of handing over one baby to look after another.
Okay. Now, if I take your mind back and stop me at any point, the 2 older boys are at kinder and crèche.
6 and 4.
Okay, at that point. Ben's 11 weeks old and life takes a turn that you had obviously never foreseen, and life changes. Can you take us back to that time and what happened?
Without going into, I guess, the full story, Ben at almost 12 weeks died of SIDS, and I never in a million years thought that SIDS happened to someone like me. I'm not sure who it did happen to, but it wasn't meant to be me. And I think, at that time, everything that you know to be true is thrown up in the air and shatters in a million pieces. So your assumptive view of the world, changes, irreversibly.
What did you know about SIDS before this?
I definitely knew about SIDS, and I knew, all 3 of the boys have been tummy sleepers.
Okay.
And with Ben in particular, I was so nervous about the fact that he was a tummy sleeper, and I've been reassured that, the chances of SIDS are so small. And
so from an education point of view, was the education out there and was the awareness out there that maybe tummy sleeping, you say you were nervous, why had you been exposed to that?
So I think that the Back to Sleep campaign had probably started already, and I knew that babies were meant to sleep on their backs to keep them safe, and he wouldn't. And so I did everything that I could in terms of asking the right people, etc. But he died anyway. And I guess for me, it changed my perspective, the things that were important to me. And I also realized at the time that the support for families out there was pretty ordinary. And all of a sudden that psych degree that I'd done, had a bit of meaning again.
So I'm going to come back to that in a second, but I imagine that the support network, as you say, contributed largely to you getting through that period in time, and I'm sure a lot of it's a blur. In terms of the Jewish community, how did that impact you, and how was the support from the Jewish community and the network within the Jewish community, and that response to SIDS and what they knew, what the Jewish community as a whole knew about SIDS and the support network there? How did that impact you?
I think it's a really good question because it's a bit of a double-edged sword. You know, we are such a tight-knit community. And I think for me, I felt like everyone was talking about me and talking about us. And I remember, you know, so vividly going back to Gandal Beeson with the two boys and being terrified to walk in those gates because I felt like everyone was looking at me. And, you know, a look in someone's eyes says so much. So it's both comforting and incredibly alienating, you know, at the same time.
What would you have been comfortable at that time? And hindsight's wonderful, and you've now got a lot of experience in this area. But what would you have been comfortable walking into school? In an ideal world, what did you want people to say to you, or how did you want them to react to you?
Yeah, I'm not sure. You know, I remember vividly, I think it was on day 1 or 2, one mum that I'd known for a really long time crossed the road as I was walking towards her and completely avoided me. And I remember coming home, I was crying in the car. And I thought I've become that person, you know, I'm a leper, like people are so uncomfortable. And that same person rang me that same day and said, I just want to explain to you why I crossed the road when I saw you today. When my brother died, I found it so overwhelming walking into school and having to say and do. And she said, I just wanted you to give you the space to do what you needed. And it put it into a completely different context. But what I realized is I wasn't given a choice. So, you know, it would have been, there is no magic. There is no, you know, I think seeing pity in people's eyes is really hard because nobody wants to be pitied. You know, maybe just an I'm sorry, or I'm here, or it's nice to see you. You know, I don't think I wanted to go into conversations with people about it. But, you know, if I think back to that time, if I could have avoided going, I would have.
So on a practical level, you've got 2 little boys at home, and the family support or the Jewish community broader support is one thing. But at the end of the day, you're going home with these 2 little boys and you're trying to keep it together. How do you do that?
I think from the very early days, we kept talking. Yep. We just kept talking, and I didn't shy away from the boys' questions. And they were tough questions. They were questions that I don't know the answers to.
Yeah. But
we sat with them, and, you know, we made sure that really from day one that it was okay to talk about Ben. And it didn't, if I cried, that's okay. I kind of, you know, I probably made the decision quite early on that this is an opportunity to truly be a role model, and that our children are not going to go through life without doing really tough stuff. And we're not going to be able to make it better all the time. And they're going to be sad, and they're going to be broken, and they're going to be hurt. And that's life. And I wanted to show them that even their parents, we could hurt, we could cry, but we were okay.
Yeah.
And that together we could get through anything. And I think that for me was really important. And I said earlier as well, perspectives change. So for me, it was just about holding that family together. You know, how can I make sure that those 2 boys, you know, aren't negatively impacted for the rest of their lives? How do I make sure that they grow up to be robust, caring little humans?
Yeah.
You know, and if I say we just kept talking, we just kept talking.
So pretty soon after, you fall pregnant with your beautiful Gemma.
Yeah.
I imagine that falling pregnant with another child post what you had been through with Ben would be traumatic all over again. There was probably a lot of PTSD. how do you deal with something that should be so beautiful and exciting, but must be so terrifying at the same time?
I think the word terrifying is a really good word. It was probably the most terrifying period of my life. As part of my dealing with Ben's death, I got into meditation. And I think I started looking at the world through a far more spiritual, philosophical lens than I had before. And the only thing that got me through that pregnancy was every single day imagining us as a family unit, me holding a healthy baby at the end of it. And that's all I pictured. I didn't know if she was a boy or girl, and we didn't find out. I think I assumed she'd be a boy because we seem to make boys. But I just kept that visual in my head all the time. Like, this is where we're going to be. This is where we're going to be. This is where we're going to be. But it was terrifying. And the first year, I don't remember a lot of it. Yeah.
Do you think, in a weird way, it was easier that she was a girl? And it's strange. I mean, it wouldn't matter, boy or girl, but
I think that there are complexities with both. If she was a boy, then I would have had to go through all of those same things that I did with Ben in the beginning, and I'd have to make decisions about his clothes and would I use them again and wouldn't I? Her being a girl made me think, did I need to lose a child to have a little girl? And that's really complicated.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what the answer is.
Yeah. And we talked a bit about the support of family and friends around you in the Jewish community, but it's at this time, or post Ben's death, that you started a relationship with Red Nose, what's now Red Nose Australia. Tell us a little bit about that.
What I now know that I didn't know then is, that people grieve in very individualized ways. And back when Ben died, the privacy laws were different. And so Red Nose, that was Sids and Kids, contacted me very quickly, and I was assigned a counsellor, and she would ring me every other day just to make sure I was okay.
How would they have been informed?
The hospital would pass on the information. And I think just in chatting to her, she told me about the programs, the volunteer opportunities, etc. And probably way sooner than I should have, I started volunteering, at Red Nose, and doing a lot of the talks to emergency responders, to emergency departments on what it's like for families, with a Sid's death, because you always will have the police involved.
And that's funny, because it's probably something that most people don't think about, the involvement of the emergency services who are involved from minute one.
It's a coronial process.
Right.
Yeah.
And was your experience with the police, what impact did that have on you? And do you remember?
I remember vividly when I saw the police, and they do it better these days, but they were uniformed. And the only thought that went through my head is, oh my God, they think I killed my baby. And I think that when you're going through, we're grown up with both respect and fear of police. So, that was a big lesson. But I think, getting involved as a volunteer was my way of starting to make meaning and to make sense by giving something back to an organisation.
So you were volunteering at that point. How often were you doing things with them?
Probably monthly, something like that. I do remember that I was standing doing a presentation, maybe 5 months pregnant with Gemma. And the person who stood there giving those presentations was a version of me that the real version of me was outside the door. And I had probably quite a well-rehearsed story that I was happy to share. And I was standing there with my belly, and, someone in the audience asked me a question that took me out of my prepared self. And it was almost like a bungee cord, bringing the real me into the room. And I remember standing there with my heart pounding, my palms sweating, answering the question thinking, I can't do this while I'm pregnant, and that was the last one that I did for a while, because it was just too confronting, because, I had, a massive mountain to climb once this baby was born as well.
So looking a few years down the track, you then went back to study. Tell us about that.
So I guess what I realised is, so I got involved, as I said, as a volunteer with Kids and Kids. I then became a staff member. I then became a board member. Yeah. And through all of that, sitting alongside it, I'd realised that the biscuits for me had just become biscuits, and I needed to be working with people. And I'd set up a small private practice, really more focused on meditation, stress management. And I realised that when people relaxed, they went blur and all this stuff came out, and who was I to deal with that? So I went back and studied counselling. And then over, I guess, the next few years, my practice was very much focused on supporting bereaved parents. And
how were people coming into contact with you? Was this, with SIDS, were they giving your details out?
I think it was a word of mouth thing. So I'd never advertised at all, so I'm guessing it's word of mouth.
And was this all sorts of counselling? Was it largely grief counselling, given your own experience?
In the beginning, it was grief counselling. I think, after a year or two of seeing a lot of bereaved parents, I realised how excited I got when someone came in and said, "I'm just not happy in my relationship," and I realised that I needed to expand more. So it became, I guess, counselling across all areas, but there was certainly a focus on grief and loss across the board.
So you had your own private practice at this point in time, and then you went on to work in the teaching space. What were you doing there?
So I then was passionate about the education space and making sure that people were as equipped as they could be. I started teaching the Diploma of Counselling through a couple of education providers. I then had the opportunity to apply for a position at the Australian Centre for Grief and Bereavement in delivering their grief and loss graduate certificate. So I took that on. At the same time, my private practice was growing, and I started clinically supervising as well the team of counsellors at the Centre for Grief and Bereavement.
So this must have been a huge eye-opener for you, given that you had been exposed to the other side as a client, as a bereaved parent, to suddenly see the flip side of what goes on behind the scenes and the mental health space.
Yeah.
What were your impressions of, we're all too painfully aware now that there's a crisis in mental health. What were you seeing at that point in time? We're going back, 10 years?
Yeah, maybe a bit more, 15.
Okay, so what were you seeing in the space at that point?
Well, I think it's not like it was. It's not like it is now. I think that we could see, obviously, the complexity of grief and the potential for grief, if not supported well, to trigger complex mental health comorbidities or mental health conditions. What I guess we weren't seeing as much then as we see now is how life is impacting that loss and the extra stressors that are part of our everyday today that's making it different.
Right. So at this point in time, you've now really done full circle, because you're counselling, you're educating, and you've now, in a sense, in an HR position, because you've got staff under you and you're managing that. At that point in time, are you enjoying all of these elements, or are you saying, I'm really loving the counselling, but get rid of all the rest? What was coming out for you at that point?
I feel like it all happened so quickly that there's always aspects of your work that you love and aspects that are more frustrating. And I guess for me, the working with people, and whether it be in education, in counselling or in supervision, is what filled my tank. For me, it gave me the opportunity. When I say to use my life experience, for me, that always sits there. It's not part of what I do, but it's the reason why I do what I do. So I think I was on such a steep learning curve that I didn't actually take that step back to say, am I enjoying this or am I just doing it? What I remember more than like the work is the challenges that I may have had with different people in different spaces. So whether it were people managing other services where, I thought that what they were providing was less than adequate, or where I saw systems that were letting people down. That was probably more challenging than the work.
Okay, fair enough. Which then always makes it a little bit strange, your next step. How did you end up as CEO of Red Nose?
God knows. I often describe myself as the most unlikely CEO. But, the short answer is that back in 2018, when I was doing all of this stuff that I was doing in grief and loss, I had a number of people call me to say, did you know that Red Nose is looking for a new CEO? And the organisation had always, been part of what I was doing. Even when I wasn't involved, I always had contact with the staff there, with volunteers there who would tell me what was going on. And the first few people who told me about the role, I very much was like, why are you telling me this? Like, there's not a chance I could do a role like that. I don't have that level of experience. Why would they pick me? In fact, I don't even know what I would put in a CV. And I think by the time the third or fourth person contacted me about this role, a seed started to be planted. And I was like, oh gosh, can I do this, etc. And I thank God every day for having bright children, because it was my eldest son who actually sat with me and helped put my CV together and helped me break down even the job advertisement that it was just 6 pages long. It had so much going. And, he stood here with a whiteboard and literally in 3 minutes he went, okay, so what they're actually asking for is bang, bang, bang. And there were like 4 points. And I put in an application, again, never, ever thinking that I would get the role. And I did. And, it's been 3.5 years now. And I look at, if I thought the last chapter of my life was a steep learning curve, this one was extraordinary, but has been, one of the most incredible parts of my journey.
So apart from personally, you've become a businesswoman as well as doing what you do best in terms of the counselling. What has SIDS, or Red Nose Australia, now over the last 3 years that you've been there, what have been some of the successes? What have been the big changes that you can say I was part of those changes?
Oh, I look at that and it's a different organisation from when I started. It's an organisation with a really positive culture, both within the staff and the volunteers. We look at the way programs are being delivered and there's a level of professionalism. And it's not that it wasn't that before. It's just gone up a level. When I look at the financial state of the organisation, it's chalk and cheese.
But most people would imagine on that it's a government-funded organisation. What's the government involvement in it?
So about 30% of our funding comes from government, both state and federal. About 30% comes from fundraising. 30% comes from our clothing collection business, where we collect secondhand goods and clothing and on-sell that. And 10% comes from our education services. So it's a fairly well-rounded revenue stream.
Okay. And what people were always familiar with, that Red Nose Day, which we've known about for many, many years, is that still as important as it was?
Absolutely. So Red Nose Day is our absolute number one fundraiser for the year. It is our opportunity to get silly for a serious cause. It's an opportunity to talk about the work that we do and the impact that it's having. It's an opportunity for parents, families to share their stories. It's a campaign that both is an incredible fundraiser, but also an awareness campaign, an advocacy campaign. And so, we look every year at how we can make it bigger and better.
Amazing. Just before we finish, I just want to bring back one other thing that we were talking about in relation to the Jewish community. I know on the side you've done talks and sessions with the religious leadership groups of the community. I'm interested just to hear how far you think our leadership, like our shul rabbis, have come in terms of being able to deal with bereaved parents and grief and loss in general.
Hugely. It was one of, the greatest honors that I was given to deliver. I think it was 4 sessions to the Rabbinical Council of Victoria.
Wow.
And you can imagine my terror, turning up to that first session, going, this is just me. How are they going to relate to me? It was the rabbis and a lot of the Rebbitzins as well. And I thought, I'm going to be challenging their thinking. I'm going to make them think about same-sex relationships and grief and loss in same-sex relationships, and the death of babies and children, some through termination for medical reasons, etc. And we're going to talk about suicide and the need for families to be supported and not judged. And we're going to talk about drug overdoses, etc. And they were remarkable. They were absolutely remarkable in their capacity to sit there and hear it and ask questions. I still continue to get the rabbis calling me, will I take on clients, etc. And genuinely one of the biggest honors to be able to kind of impact that kind of change in our community. And that's, at the end of the day, that's why I do the work that I do. I want, every family who is impacted by death to feel supported. And as a community, there is so much that we can do, to support someone. And often it's not by knowing exactly what to say. It's by knowing that it's okay to not know what to say and to sit in the mud with them anyway.
It's a pretty amazing piece of advice to give to people who are confronted with that situation where they're just uncomfortable.
Yeah. And it is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Pain, none of us like feeling vulnerable, and we don't talk about death and dying because it's uncomfortable. And yet we're all going to be affected, every single one of us. And if we can acknowledge that I'm prepared to kind of try and get comfortable in the discomfort, and I'm not going to know what to say, and I'm not going to know what to do, and I'm going to feel helpless and probably hopeless, but I want to make sure that that person who needs this support knows that I'm there anyway.
Some wise words of advice. That brings us to the end of our time together. Thank you. It's been a privilege talking to you and hearing your story. I hope you've all enjoyed it too. And that was our session. And I thank Keren Ludski for her time with us today.
Thank you very much.